In this video I will show you how to create a particle system that can emit complete pictures. We will use geometry nodes and the new simulation nodes. To use simulation nodes you need the recently released Blender version 3.6. Download this version from blender.org. In the lower window you see the entire geometry node graph for the effect. The idea comes from Chris Brenninger. I link his channel in the upper right corner. He started with simulation node tutorials several months ago in the beta version of Blender. Check out his channel for more tutorials. Let's get started with the tutorial. I added a grid node with 5 × 5 meters and 101 vertices in X and Y direction. I will explain the strange amount of vertices later. I loaded my channel logo with the image texture node and connected a UV unwrapping node to the texture. Otherwise Blender creates 5 times the logo on the 5 × 5 grid. With the UV unwrapping node you get a one big image. With the help of a mesh to point node we want to create a point where the image is white and we want to create no points where the image is black. So we connect the color information into the color ramp and from the color ramp into the selection input. With Shift-Ctrl left click you can activate the viewer node if the node wrangler add-on is active. This is how the image looks like gridded with a resolution of 101 by 101. The color ramp provides more contrast to the image. Without the color ramp the image looks like this. When I move the black slider to the right we get more and more contrast. So that the particle system can produce the image, it should create a single image row with each emission. This means in the first frame it should create the first row, in the second frame it should create the second row, and so on. So we need to shift the image row by row and we need to know the distance between each row. This is where the strange number of vertices comes from in the grid node. I drew a simple 3 × 3 grid. The distance between two rows is 5 divided by 2. So we divide by the number of rows minus 1. In our case we need to divide 5 by smooth 100 to get our distance between two rows, and the distance we need to shift the image. In our node graph I used the scene time node and multiply the frame number with -0.05. The result is processed by the math modulo node. I set the modulo to 5. This means when our image of 5 × 5 meters is complete, we start all over again. I used the result in the Y input of the combine XYZ node. At last I added a vector add node and set the Y value to 2. This means we don't start in the center of the image but at the bottom. I activated the viewer node after the set position node. When I jump to the next frame with the right arrow key, you can see that the rows of the image hit exactly the x-axis. To create the particles, I added a flat cube of a thickness of 0.05 on the x-axis, and every vertex row of the image inside the cube is created by the particle system. I added an object info node and referenced the cube. I extruded the cube from a flat plane. I used a geometry proximity node and all vertices with a distance greater than 0.001 will be deleted by the delete geometry node. I show the effect with another viewer node. When I jump forward frame by frame, you see every single row of the image on the x-axis. I can make the effect more visible with a not node. I plug it in before the delete node. And now you see the entire image except the row on the x-axis. Let's get to the most exciting part, the simulation nodes. When you open the Add menu in Blender 3.6, you see the new region Simulation and you can add the simulation zone. What can you do with such a simulation zone? The node setup bases on the frames in your scene. You can reuse the geometry you created the last frame, edit it and send the result to the next frame. And you can define your own attributes and use them in the next frame. First, we add our image row to the simulation zone. This means every frame we add a new row to the simulation zone. And that's it already for the particle system. The other nodes in the simulation zone are responsible for the speed and the age of the particles. The first attribute we want to create and store is the age of a particle. We achieve this with the store named attribute node. We set the data type to integer and the name to age. We can read the content of the attribute with the named attribute node. Again, we set the data type to integer and the name to age. In each frame, the attribute age is increased by 1 and stored again. In the first frame of each particle, the age is initialized with 0. The first application of the attribute is the lifetime. If a particle has reached its maximal age of 75, it will be deleted. The next attribute is the speed of a particle. The speed has the data type vector and is stored again in the stored named attribute node. If the add node doesn't add something from the other branch, the speed remains the same in this frame. The set position node uses the vector to refresh the new position of a particle. Now we want to look how the speed is calculated. The speed depends on the age of a particle. When the particles have the age 1, we set the initial speed to minus 0.05. This is the same speed as the speed of the image shift from the beginning. The result is computed by the add and the combine xyz node and goes into the vector add node. It would be boring if the particle speed remains the same from the beginning to the end. So at frame 50, the speed is increased by a tiny random amount. If you choose a value greater than 50, you can better recognize the image, but you lose realism. The increased speed is like a gravity effect. Until the end of the simulation zone, we just created single points, but we need geometry to render something. I used the instance on point node to render icospheres with a radius of 0.03 and 1 subdivision. I also applied a shade smooth node. The last node is a set material node. I created a water material from the simple glass shader. Bonus tip at the end. I opened the physics tab, and when you add a simulation zone, Blender adds a baking menu. If you want to render your scene, you can bake and delete the bake simulation here. In the outro, you see the animation with different images.